Just a reminder to our Speculating Wildly About Crime listeners, this is for entertainment purposes only and solely the thoughts and opinions of our team. We do invite you to sit back, relax, and enjoy the show.
Welcome to Speculating Wildly About Crime. I'm Carolina, and I will be your host for today's episode. We will be discussing the disappearance of Branson Kayne Perry. I used a lot of sources for this episode, including podcasts. True Crime Garage did a good episode. Trace Evidence also did a very good episode on this. I also used a lot of news articles. St. Joseph Press was a big source. I also used Diane Fanning's book entitled Baby Be Mine. All of the sources that I used will be in the show notes. There's also some family-run pages of Branson's family that we will add to the show notes as well. The case of Branson Kayne Perry will take us to Skidmore, Missouri. This town has a landmass of only 0.33 square miles. At the time of Branson's disappearance, the population was 346 people, which is actually decreased to approximately 239 people as of the 2022 census. Branson Kayne Perry was born on February 24th, 1981, to parents Becky and Bob Perry. Although Branson's parents divorced in 2000, everything that I read said that they continued having a very amicable relationship after the divorce. Branson ended up going to live with his father in Skidmore, and his younger brother Philip went to live with his mother in a town about 20 miles outside of Skidmore. Branson, growing up, it was his dream. He had wanted to join the military. However, he was deemed ineligible because he had a racing heart condition. So for medical reasons, he wasn't able to actually take that dream to go into the military. He shifted his career path. He decided not to go to college, but he did get a job as a contractor with a roofer. However, he was laid off of that job, unfortunately. And a fun fact for him, he also worked for a traveling petting zoo, which I thought was interesting, especially for a town as small as Skidmore. I don't know how he got that job, but I guess he got to travel along with some animals. There's a lot of really good pictures of him. Branson also studied Hapkido, which is a Korean martial art, and was pretty passionate about that. And he loved peach pie, his grandmother's peach pie, which I thought was just very sweet. So I'm going to bring us to April 11th of 2001. Branson and his friend Gina Crawford were cleaning the home that Branson shared with his father, Bob Perry. Bob had to go to the hospital due to some medical reasons a few days prior, and Branson wanted to get the house cleaned for his father's return. So he had his friend Gina over to help him. What I read was that Gina was a family friend. Branson and her were pretty close friends. There were actually two other male individuals at the home on this date. They were changing the alternator in Bob's truck. It's a little unclear of whether they were individuals that lived in the town or they were maybe outside mechanics that either Branson or even the father, Bob, had called over to help Gina. At one point during the day, saw Branson go into the kitchen and he was rummaging through one of the cabinets. She asked him what he was doing or what he was looking for, and he brushed it off and said, "Oh, nothing," and left it at that. So Gina didn't ask him any further questions. She did think that she saw him take something out of the cabinet and go out the back door. Branson's mother, Becky, described Gina's account and the timeline leading up to Branson's disappearance as, quote, sketchy, and that she said it often felt like it didn't make any sense. At one point, Gina decides she's going upstairs. Branson is still downstairs, and she hears the screen door open of the front of the house. So she looks out the window and she sees Branson outside talking to the two men. So at one point, Gina goes upstairs. She's cleaning out one of the rooms. She actually decides to take a shower. When she comes downstairs, she notices that one of the men that was working on the truck was inside in the kitchen, rummaging through the kitchen cabinets. And she asked what he was doing. And he said, "Oh, nothing," shut the cabinet and walked out of the house. So she found that strange. Branson's outside talking to the men at the truck. Gina's upstairs. She looks out the window. She sees Branson starting to walk away from the house. So she calls out and says, "Oh, Branson, what are you doing?" And he said, "Oh, I'm just going to go return these jumper cables to a shed. And I'm going to go out for a bit, but I'll be back in a few minutes." It's my understanding from what I've read that the shed was adjacent to the house. It was still on the property, but it was set a little bit away. So Branson did have to walk a little bit to get to the shed. So she sees him. She goes about her cleaning. Branson doesn't return by the time that she's done doing what she's doing. And she decides to just leave the house. Eventually, at some point, the two men that were working on the alternator also left, but it's a little unclear whether they left at the same time. Later that day, on April 11th, Branson's grandmother, Joanne Stinnett, goes to visit Branson's father, Bob, at the hospital. She asked whether Branson had come to visit him. And he said, "Oh, no, he didn't come." Joanne Stinnett really didn't make too much of it, but as she's driving home that next day, she got a little bit worried. Branson had been visiting him every day. It set alarm bells off in Joanne's mind. So she was like, "Okay, on my way home, I'm just going to drive by the house and I'm going to see whether Branson's home." She gets to the house and the door is open, but it was open in some way that she walked right in. And with this, I could see too, if Gina was leaving the house when Branson had left and he hadn't returned yet, if she didn't have a key or anything, she would have just shut the door and left it open. Joanne walked in the house and the radio was on. Nothing looked amiss in the house to her, but she did think it was strange that he wasn't there and that the radio was on. So she started to call around. She called Branson's mother and said, "Oh, have you seen Branson?" And she said, "No." Over the course of the next few days, Joanne kept asking around and said, "Has anyone heard from Branson?" She went back to the home again. Branson wasn't there. Still nothing looked amiss in the house. So she started to grow more concerned. On April 17th, 2001, Bob Perry, so Branson's father, was discharged from the hospital and he was sent home. Branson still has not contacted anyone in the family. There's no sign of him being at the house. At that point, Branson's father, Bob, and the mother, Becky, decided to call the police. On April 17th of 2001, they officially filed a missing persons report for Branson. This may or may not be important later, so it's definitely something I want to raise at this point. This information is solely from that book written by Diane Fanning that is entitled Baby Be Mine. And every other source that I have found has cited back to this book as being the original source of this information. But on April 7th of 2001, Branson had gone over to his neighbor's house and spent some time there. This person's name was Jason Bierman. While there, Jason Bierman gave Branson an illicit substance. While under the influence, Branson allegedly got undressed in the home, danced around naked, and ended up shaving his pubic hair in front of Jason Bierman. After this event, Branson and Jason Bierman ended up engaging in sexual activity together. The next day, Branson had disclosed to his father about this incident that happened with the neighbor. Bob, Branson's father, had thought that Branson may be interested in men. However, when Branson was telling him this story, he was very upset about it because he had felt as though by having been provided that drug that Jason had taken advantage of him. Whether Branson took that substance willingly or Jason gave it to him without Branson knowing. And at that point, Bob Perry, Branson's father, was very angry about the situation and had wanted to do something about it with Jason. Unfortunately, shortly after that is when Bob had gone to the hospital. But it was something that Bob had said that really upset Branson. I just wanted to raise that because it's something that happened very shortly before Branson's disappearance.
Had Branson and Jason been known to hang out before this, or was this their first encounter?
I didn't find anything definitive about that. They were next door neighbors, so I assume that they had some level of interaction just for that reason.
Do we know the sexual orientation of Jason?
I do not. I didn't see that anywhere in the sources.
And not like it changes anything, but do we know if Jason also took substances that night?
I do not know that either. Like I said, it is the one source that it came from was this book, which we'll touch on this a little bit later, but the book was actually about one of Branson's relatives. But there was a few chapters about Branson and his disappearance. I think that the author probably got that information from interviewing family members. So if Branson hadn't disclosed that to his father, they probably wouldn't know. And maybe if Branson was under the influence, he wasn't even sure if Jason was taking substances as well. Also, from what I've read about Skidmore in general, they did have a drug issue. There were a lot of individuals using, selling drugs in that community. Shifting back to April 17th, when Branson was reported missing, they had lost multiple days from the last time that he was seen, especially because police seemed to hit the ground running on this as soon as this missing person report was filed. Immediately, ground search parties were mobilized by the Nottoway County Sheriff at the time, Ben Espy. They covered a 15-mile perimeter all around Skidmore. The Missouri Highway Patrol and the Drug Strike Task Force also assisted in this. They obviously searched the house. Nothing appeared to be missing, including Branson's wallet. So none of his real personal belongings seemed to be with him at the time. There was an early speculation by Branson's father that he maybe hitchhiked to friends that he had in Kansas City. He thought that was possible because Branson was upset about the situation that happened with the neighbor a few days before, and he decided he just wanted to get away for a little bit. They did locate the friend that he would have been seeing there, who said, "No, I haven't seen him. I haven't heard from him." So that seemed to lead nowhere. The police interviewed Gina Crawford as well as the other two individuals that were at the house fixing the alternator. Neither of those two men have ever been publicly named, which I find interesting. Somewhat reluctantly, Gina Crawford did tell the police that Branson did smoke weed and use amphetamines, which obviously made everyone a little bit worried due to Branson's racing heart condition. The county sheriff at the time, Ben Espy, was quoted as maybe calling into question the veracity or whether Gina Crawford was telling the whole truth about that day. He was quoted as saying he knows who they were seen with last and doesn't expect any help from them. The people were with him are not cooperating well, so I suspect an illegal act possibly contributed to his disappearance. They're hindering the case, and if they did something, they're not going to give any information. The police were concerned that the whole story wasn't being provided of the day that Branson disappeared. The police also interviewed a lot of other people from the town. According to the book by Diane Fanning, hundreds of people were interviewed, which, if that's the case, that means most of Skidmore was interviewed in relation to this case. I think that's really good that they were really trying to figure out if anyone knew anything, especially given that this is a small town. I feel like there would be somebody that would see Branson, know who he is, be able to recognize him in this town, that I think it makes sense to interview as many people as you can from the town.
Was it people going, I'm going to mind my business, so I'm not going to say anything? Or did they get any quality anything, or did they not get anything at all?
My speculation is that they didn't really lead anywhere.
So maybe this is a premature question, but the 11th to the 17th is a long time. Did he disappear like that on a regular?
So his mom had said that this was very unlike Branson, that he would not just go away for multiple days without contacting his family. I think that the mother may have let some days pass because she was living 20 miles away. She wasn't seeing him on a daily basis. But I think what raised the alarm bells for her is that the grandmother had gone to the house multiple days and Branson wasn't there, and he didn't tell anyone that he was leaving. I think it was her thought that if he was going to leave, he would have told somebody in the family what he was doing.
And a lot
That
of things
raises-
are out of the norm that played into the factor up. Dad's in the hospital because I'm sure mom and dad wasn't talking on a regular basis. Cars broken down. There's so many factors that play into just writing it off as another day I didn't hear from Branson because he's manning the house right now. He was working with the mechanics and making sure the car is getting taken care of. There's a lot of things that would justifiably be why I haven't heard from you today.
And what year was this, Carolina?
It was 2001.
So people probably had cell phones. I could totally see them being like, maybe he doesn't have a cell phone at all at this time. Even now, I could go 5 days without talking to my mom or texting her, and she doesn't send out the dogs.
I didn't see anywhere that Branson had a cell phone. He might have, but that was never really a topic. I'm wondering whether he just didn't have a phone.
What day did his grandma go to the house?
So it was April 12th, the day after him and Gina were at the home cleaning.
Wondering if she shared it with anybody.
What I read is that she didn't share it with Bob, that she was concerned at all that he didn't come visit him because she didn't want to get his anxiety up because he was dealing with his medical issues. So I think that Bob was unfortunately left in the dark out of good intentions, that they didn't want him to worry. And I think Joanne, the grandmother, had just said, let me try to just ask around and see where Branson may be. Like, let me ask neighbors and friends and his mom. And unfortunately, the days just passed.
But he's 20. His dad's in the hospital, who he lives with. They expected his son to come visit him every day. The kids come and go at 20.
I saw that Bob, his father, had any kind of alarm bells that he didn't come to visit him. He had visited him the few days before, and the grandmother thought, oh, I find this strange because he had been visiting. I would have expected him to visit you. It raised enough of an alarm bell for her to check the home to see if Branson was there. If he was just going to be there for a few days and come home, Branson had already visited him at the hospital. He's now working on getting the house ready. Did Bob know there was issues with the car? That was the vehicle that they were sharing together. Branson might not have had a way to get to the hospital if the car wasn't working.
That could have been one of the things that gave the father the security of, oh, I didn't hear from him. Like, we have an appointment set up for these guys to come handle the car. Gina's going to come help clean the house. There's all these obligations we've now set in place to get ready for me to come home. I could see how, especially men, could easily just write that off. You know where the money is, which is part of my speculation of the cabinets. You know where the things are. You have no reason to call me or come see me. I'll see when I get home.
To extend from what you're saying, David, he could also just be thinking, he came and visited me twice already. He's 20. My God, go hang out with your own friends.
And I hate to gender assign things, but some things are just, we just know are true. And so for a man to be like, it's whatever, I'm in the hospital, he's got better things to do, let him go do with those things. But then for a grandmother or mother to be like, no, this is weird. It makes sense to me that the grandmother was like, wait a minute, do we need to go check on Branson? Because you're always going to be her baby.
Branson and his grandmother did seem to be pretty close too. So I could see that kind of relationship of, oh, you should be go visiting your dad, but also seeing, is everything good at the house? She was the one that made the peach pie that he loved very much.
Right. I could also see her being like, okay, the door's unlocked, the radio's on, but that's none of my business. Where it backtracks to how long it went on because I don't like it, but it's none of my business if he's coming and going with his friends or whatever.
Yeah. And I think that the event of Bob coming home from the hospital, and I read a couple of different things that he maybe was supposed to have come home a little bit earlier than he did, but by the time that he came home, I think that's when everyone really started to be concerned that Branson is not there to see his father home. They were very close. And he was trying to get the house ready for him. He wanted it to be clean and nice for his return. The fact that he wasn't there, I think, is when all of the family collectively, finally, everyone had talked to the other ones. And they're like, okay, no, something is really up. To that point with the family, they were very active in the search for Branson in the beginning. In the first year after he disappeared, the mother distributed 1,300 flyers all around Skidmore and outside of Skidmore. In December of 2001, so a few months after Branson disappeared, a $5,000 reward was offered by Branson's family. Unfortunately, everything hit a dead end. Nothing really came of the interviews. As law enforcement said, they thought that maybe Gina and the two other individuals in the home maybe had more information to share, but did not. So things went to a standstill despite the extensive searches. The first real plausible lead came in 2003. So that would have been about 2 years after Branson disappeared. An individual was identified through an FBI program that was called Operation Candyman, which sought to identify and target individuals that were possessing and distributing obscene materials, including child pornography. There is a lot of detail that I am not going to say here. I'm going to give the pertinent points. The full account of all of this can be found online. But during Operation Candyman, the FBI identified an individual named Michael Adam Davidson. He was arrested and charged as part of Operation Candyman in March of 2002. They found that he was distributing and in possession of a lot of obscene materials, so really dark web, horrific things. Once he was arrested, the FBI were going through all of his electronics, through his computers that he owned. And they found that he was talking to somebody on the internet who was using the screen name or the online alias of Buggerbutt. They had a lot of conversations back and forth. However, there was one chat that caught the attention of the FBI analyst. In the chat, this person using the screen name Buggerbutt had said that he had kidnapped, sexually assaulted, and murdered a boy from Skidmore. He described it as he picked him up hitchhiking, he gave him beer, he gave him drugs, and took him for what he calls an Ozark overnight, where he sexually assaulted him, tortured him emotionally, physically. And he was telling this individual that the FBI arrested, Michael Adam Davidson, all of the details about this. And in this chat, Michael Adam Davidson had been pressing the person on the other end for additional details about this incident. The Buggerbutt person told Michael Adam Davidson that he got a little bit worried because he saw a missing persons poster for the person that he kidnapped in a gas station. And he described a lot of the other individuals that he potentially or allegedly assaulted as throwaways. And he was nervous because this person had people looking for him. Now he's telling these details to somebody online. And the Buggerbutt individual was saying that this could be a fatal mistake, that I'm giving you this level of detail. So the FBI analyst saw this, immediately looked into it further, saw that Skidmore was a very small town. So they decided to contact the local law enforcement. And they said, does this match any cases in your area? The police immediately said, that matches Branson Perry. The boy was described as a blonde boy from Skidmore. There was a missing persons flyer for Branson in that gas station. It was also found out that individual had viewed a missing persons page set up by Branson's family and did end up actually talking to Davidson, the individual who was arrested, about seeing the mother's plea online for the return of her son. So the police in Skidmore decide to get a warrant to figure out the identity of the person using that screen name. They end up getting the name of Jack Wayne Rogers. They find out where he lived, waited till he threw out his garbage. So they found a piece of mail that said Jack Wayne Rogers. So they ended up getting a warrant to search. I don't want to spend too much time on Jack Wayne Rogers because he is a horrible person. However, this was not the first time that he had come into contact or had been convicted of distributing or possessing child pornography. In 1992, he was found to have received child pornography and was given, I think, 4 months in jail and 3 years of supervision after that. Absolutely nothing. So he ended up moving to Fulton. It was about 250 miles away from Skidmore. And he actually became a lay minister at the church. So he was preaching to people after having received child pornography and having that conviction. The police in Skidmore, they got the search warrant. They were able to search his home, search his vehicle. They found an extensive amount of very concerning things, including child pornography, other obscene materials, surgical equipment, as well as bondage equipment. It turned out that Jack Wayne Rogers had come into contact with an individual who wanted to have gender-affirming surgery. Jack Wayne Rogers made this individual believe that they had the capability to perform such a surgery and ended up doing the surgery on this individual.
With
Yes.
no medical background. What did he do
No
for
medical background at all. Did this surgery. And
successfully?
Not really, no. The individual lived, luckily, because that's a major surgery to undergo. Unfortunately, days after this, they had very excessive bleeding. They ended up going to the hospital, and the hospital basically said if they didn't come in, they were going to die from bleeding to death. Also, what they found in going through his home and his vehicle was a necklace. It had a pendant on it that resembled a pendant that Branson was known to wear by his family. The family said they believed that this necklace belonged to Branson. So at this point, it really seemed like they had a viable suspect. The family was very emotional that this could all be true, but it also felt like closure to them that they might know what happened to Branson. They had gone to this Jack Wayne Rogers, who they arrested for all the other things that they found in his home, who denied having any involvement in Branson's disappearance. Through his attorney, he had said that this was complete fantasy that he had written online, and none of it was true, and he has absolutely no involvement in Branson's disappearance. He has never been charged in connection with Branson's disappearance. He did end up going to prison for 30 years. He was found guilty. Actually, I think he pleaded guilty to 2 counts of possession of child pornography and 3 counts of distribution of obscene materials. He also had some charges from the gender-affirming surgery that he undertook without having any type of medical license to perform such a surgery. So he did go to prison. Despite Jack Wayne Rogers seeming like a plausible lead, given the details that the police were able to uncover, including the pendant necklace that they did find in his vehicle, he was never charged in connection with Branson's disappearance. Over the years since Branson disappeared in 2001, the family and law enforcement have continued to actively search and investigate this case. The grandmother, Joanne Stinnett, was quoted that they searched every oil well, every outside toilet, everywhere that was possible for us to think that something could be there. But that's to be said that they definitely searched every place that they could possibly think of that could hold some clues about what might have happened to Branson or where he was. As early as 2019 or 2020, there were still annual searches that were organized by community members going out in and around Skidmore to try to uncover anything that they could to give an idea of where Branson might have went. Abandoned schools, barns, fields, rivers, railroad tracks, all of those have been searched to find Branson. In 2009, the police did get a credible tip about Branson's body being in a field. So they did go to search that. It was an area called Quitman. I don't really know how to say that, but I guess it's a park-like area off of Missouri Highway 113. I think in that area there were about, at the time, like 50 or 55 people living in a community there. So another very small area right off the highway. The police dug a 20 by 40-foot hole in the property that was 23 feet deep. So again, excavate the entire area to see if anything from Branson was there based on that credible tip. Unfortunately, they didn't find anything there that would give any idea of what happened to Branson. This family has endured other tragedies since Branson's disappearance. This is a case that I knew about, and I actually didn't know it was connected to Branson's case. But has anyone heard of the murder of Bobby Jo Stinnett? She was murdered on December 16th, 2004. She was Branson's cousin. I don't know if it was a direct first cousin, but some level of cousin. She was murdered by a woman named Lisa Marie Montgomery, who actually lured her under the guise of selling a dog, of being a dog breeder. And she strangled Bobby Jo Stinnett and cut her unborn fetus out of her stomach. The baby did survive this incident. The baby did go back to their father, but just a horrible case and another tragedy for this family and the town of Skidmore. About 10 years after Branson's disappearance, his case was in the news again. The county sheriff had said they hadn't received any real credible tips in a while, that every once in a while they would get something and they always followed up on everything, but they didn't have anything they could really follow. The family was working with a missing persons advocate to assist them through the process. She lended a very great support to the family. The family did reach out to a psychic who had indicated, and I did see it reported, that she didn't charge for any of the services that she was providing to the family. But she said that Branson had died the day he disappeared. He was no longer in Skidmore, but what she saw with her abilities, he was tortured to a great deal, and she didn't share any of those details with the family. Unfortunately, nothing came of any of her tips about where Branson is, but I think the family reached out as just another way to try to find answers for what happened. Branson's father, he had some medical issues. He passed away in March of 2004. So he died not knowing where Branson was or what happened to him. Branson's mother, in the years after Branson disappeared, had been struggling with cancer and was going to a lot of treatment in the times of trying to activate these searches for Branson, and she passed away in 2011 of cancer, which in her obituary was the first time that the family had come to terms that Branson may no longer be alive, because she was listed as being predeceased by her son Branson. I did also read that they did create a grave for him. His stepfather actually bought a gravestone right next to his mother. If Branson, which hopefully he is alive somewhere, but if he's not, they have that set up for him next to his mother. Said the family had a lot of run pages about Branson's disappearance. We will link all of those in the show notes. His grandmother, Joanne Stinnett, also has passed away, not knowing what happened to Branson. This case has caught the attention of a retired police officer from New Jersey. He has taken to social media and has tried to actively investigate this case. This will go into, I think, when we go into speculation and theories, but the police now, as well as this other retired police officer, have come out and said that they do believe that this case is drug related in some nature. However, they don't have people coming forward to actually give them the pieces that they need to make any arrests in Branson's disappearance. With that being said, this is a case that is very actively on the minds of everyone in Skidmore, and it is still actively being investigated. But I think we've come to the time to speculate about the multiple theories. The main theories in this case that I've seen are Jack Wayne Rogers, the individual who was arrested for child pornography. There is the drug theory that seems to be what the police, at least in recent years, have believed is possible to have happened to Branson. They have received tips that Branson was involved potentially in the local drug trade and that he may have been killed because he owed a lot of money to a drug dealer. Branson's family didn't seem to be very aware that Branson was using drugs or may have been involved in the drug trade. I did see an article, I believe it was his aunt, said she didn't know that Branson had been using drugs, but he did disclose to her that he wanted to go into rehab. Joseph News, we will cite it in the notes. She did say that he was planning to go to a rehabilitation facility, potentially in the days leading up to his disappearance on April 11th. Another theory is the neighbor, Jason Bierman, potentially being involved, but the police have never named him publicly as a suspect or arrested him in connection with Branson's disappearance.
So the two men that were there fixing the car with Gina, do we know if they had any kind of relation? Were they friends? Were they neighbors?
There was nothing that I saw related to that, which I found very interesting in my research. It wasn't clear whether they were hired people, whether they were friends that were just out of the goodness of their heart coming to change the alternator. So I don't know.
So Bobby Joe was murdered after Branson went missing, correct?
Yeah, 2004. So Branson went missing in 2001, and I believe that her murder happened in December of 2004.
Okay. Was there any conversations about how experienced this police force was? Was this something that they were equipped to handle, or was it like, hey, this is the first time we're dealing with this type of thing?
So I don't think that they've had a significant amount of experience dealing with a missing person, at least to this level. I did see in one of the articles, the police officer who was the sheriff at the time had said something along the lines of, this is a really tough case because when we deal with missing person cases, they usually turn up within a couple of days. And this is not that case. So I think maybe they were a little bit out of their element, that they hadn't really seen something to this level, that even by the time they got involved, he had already been missing for multiple days and there had been no contact with him.
Regardless of how much experience they had, it seemed like they took it serious. Another thing that really impresses me is diversity in a small town is not always accepted. And if it was known that whether he identified as being gay, but the father expected or had a suspicion of, and he had even told his father that whether he said I'm gay or not, I still had an encounter. You have this small town, which again leads to a less diversity and inclusion kind of mind. And the police was doing this kind of work for someone that was probably considered to be a minority, is pretty impressive as well.
Which leads me to how prevalent were drugs? Was it known that this was a big drug town, that there were these big drug issues?
A lot that I have seen when they have come out and they said that they think that this is drug related. I don't know if that meant it's a small town. What was the level of the drug use there? I did see that there was a local drug trade. In that book that Diane Fanning wrote, she had the chapters about Branson in there, described it as the local drug trade. So there was something going on in that town, but exactly what that looked like, I'm not sure.
But I feel like if I said 80 people in a town do drugs, in a Chicago, they'd think that's fantastic. But in a small town, that's 40% of your population. That's horrible. What does that really look like? Oh, that farmer up the road? Oh, yeah, he's a pot farmer. Of course, nobody's turning him in. Everybody knows that he's selling. Is it that instance too?
That's exactly what I was going to say, Dana, is this was what, 2001, 2004 is the time frame. Then we considered marijuana a drug. It's not considered a drug. Was it that a few people had a few joints, or was it where it was people were going to a pain clinic in the town over and getting opioids and bringing them into their small town and selling them, and what was considered a drug then? Because if we were doing this in 2001, you're like, oh, someone had a pot farm.
And
You know what I mean?
but I think they brought up methamphetamines a couple times.
Oh, you're right.
So if the police didn't know, that is a big dot. Gina had said after the fact that Branson had been smoking marijuana or using marijuana in some fashion and using amphetamines.
Didn't they look in the shed at one point and the jumper cables weren't in there, and then they went back later and they were?
I did see that in a couple of sources. I didn't bring it up because I was trying to cross-reference from other things. That was a thing in this case that stuck out. I'm glad you brought that up, Dana. According to Gina's account of events, she was at the home upstairs. She heard the porch door close. She called out to Branson, oh, what are you doing? And he said, oh, I'm going to go put the jumper cables in the shed, and then I'm going to go out for a bit. The police, when they did search that shed the first time, allegedly the jumper cables were not there. In the days after Branson disappeared, they obviously were continuing to search throughout Skidmore, and they did research that shed, and the jumper cables were there.
If the people were fixing an alternator, you may need jumper cables. So they may have been used. If Branson was going to go put them in the shed, and whatever reason didn't, then the guys who were fixing the car may have done it too. You never know.
The jumper cables are definitely a strange thing. And I did see that on Branson's mother's family run page, despite what the police initially said, that they got everything out of them and they weren't going to get any more. So maybe Branson's mother got that knowledge. I don't know if it was talking to Gina specifically or the police told her about the jumper cables. So it wasn't really publicly out there, which makes me question whether that has a larger significance in this case. If everything happened the way Gina said it did, Branson went to go put the jumper cables back in the shed. They were still working on the car at that point, and they weren't fixing the alternator. They were like, oh, we need the jumper cables. One of them goes to get them out of the shed, and then they chuck it in their own car afterwards, and they end up leaving with them. But then that begs the question, did they bring them back and then they didn't say anything ever about it?
They were random strangers that they never saw again since they're not named.
One part of my speculation was I can see someone getting paranoid to the fact of I took these jumper cables accidentally. There's someone missing. My fingerprints are all over this. What if we just stuck them back in the garage as if nothing happened and it be innocently done? I can see how that could be in someone's mind a easy, this gets me out of the picture versus this raises speculation.
I think there's just so much that could have happened. And as in a lot of other cases, it could be a combination. All I know is if I was Gina, the one that was helping him, if I'm over there helping you clean your house and then you're like, I'm out, I'm gonna go take a walk, I'd be like, I'm not staying here and cleaning your house. I would be upset with that. For whatever reason, if he wandered off or had a reason, he was going to the gas station bar or whatever, if something happened with him, I have a whole bunch of theories, but he could have went to that Jason's house. They said something about that he had some type of heart condition, that if he had some drugs that he may have passed because of drugs. That makes me think that maybe that happened. But when you're talking about being tortured and all of that with the other guy, if he would have gotten in with that ring of people, not necessarily by his own choosing, if they would have given him drugs, he may have passed really quickly. The psychic said on the day he went missing, just because of his heart condition. If you're a bad guy and you're giving somebody drugs so they can do whatever you want them to do sexually or torturing them, and then they die because whatever medication or whatever meds you gave them is bad for them more than normal. I guess I don't really have a great theory, except that I don't think he intentionally left either. Because what if you've been visiting your dad's in the hospital, you're willing to clean your house because he's coming home. I don't think he would have intentionally like disappeared or left in that. Somewhere between when he walked up, when he left, something happened to him. And again, if I'm putting all the stock in what the psychic said, if it was drug related, it was because whoever had him gave him drugs that would have irritated his heart condition and made him pass due to that.
There's so much that could have happened, and if it's unclear whether there's a full account of even the last people to see Branson, you're already working from behind, and the fact that the search didn't start till days later. So I think there's just so many things that could potentially happen, and it's hard to say for sure.
I don't have a finger pointing, this person is the one. If he was in this bad place with sexual assault and maybe experimenting in a drug that he hadn't done before, if the person that he told was his father pretty quickly after, that has to be a safe place. Like, why wasn't Gina, who was cleaning the house, why wasn't she the one that he went to first with something like that? Your father is a safe place, who is now hospitalized on his way home. You're having the house clean and you're going to disappear. Where else would you rather be but in that house? Gina has a lot of details. She knew exactly what time she was cleaning this room downstairs and upstairs and decided this Windex has me dirty and want a shower. The house isn't done being cleaned yet. And while I'm getting ready to shower, I hear a door close. She saw Branson take drugs or heard him talk about drugs in this time they were together, saw him getting into a specific cabinet, which to me makes me think money. A lot of people hide their money in cabinets. That I just have a lot of questions around that. Where's Gina?
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. And I think even from what the police said and what Branson's mother even put on the family run page, that a lot of the details of the timeline are very sketchy of that day. It's a lot of just my own speculation and thoughts, a lot of strange things that have happened, that she's showering in the middle of cleaning and then sees the mechanic guy going through the cabinet. Like you said, David, hearing the door open and then looking out the window and seeing Branson walk away with jumper cables. It's all very strange. And going back to that thought about the jumper cables, she's the only one that saw that. That's her account of what happened about those jumper cables, that Dana had said that you were in the shed and then not in the shed.
Like the only specific details we're getting of this story has no receipts. It's just from Gina's mouth. Gay people, or anyone that is even thought of to be gay, it is considered to be a weakness. And so then I have questions of the two mechanics. Could they have seen him as an easy target? I don't want to just point a finger at Gina, but I have questions.
Can I jump onto the back of that with my speculation? Because I have the same but offshoot. I have a lot of questions for Gina as well, because she's giving me a little bit of Elle Woods vibes. And you were in the shower? But I'm thinking, is she going into self-preservation mode of saying, I did see him walking away with those two guys, or the two guys throw him in their truck or something, but for my own safety, I'm certainly not saying that. I also question if she did see the two guys come in and rummage through the cabinet, because you said that she was like, oh, that's weird, and then like went on about cleaning. So did that mean that these two people were familiar to Gina and Branson? Because if it's weird, to me that means like they're acquaintances. Oh, that's weird that they're rummaging through the cabinets, but maybe Branson said, come grab something. But if they were two hired mechanics, to me they'd be like, what are you doing in my kitchen? Get out of here. So that's another question I have for Gina. The jumper cables situation with them not being there and then being there. So did something nefarious happen, or were they there the whole time? Maybe when they searched the first time, they were in there, but they didn't know that they were specifically looking for the jumper cables, so it didn't raise any flags. So when then Gina said we had them, then they went back. I don't know. I don't have a exact person to point at.
I have a lot of questions about a couple individual pockets of people. First of all, I agree with David. A lot of questions about Gina. Why were there so many details? Why did you know every little thing about, oh, he went in this cabinet, and then this other person went in the cabinet, and then these two guys were out there, and then the jumper cables, and then I took a shower even though it's clean. Get the fuck out of here. Something doesn't add up. She's got way too much going on. It's almost like how somebody tries to create an alibi for themselves and they have their day down to a minute. I just didn't buy that, but also I'm not 100% sure how she fits into it. Second thing I have questions on is we went days before we're reporting him missing, and the grandma went to the house on the 12th, if my notes are correct. At that point, that something was fishy, but you still waited till the 17th. Doesn't really sit right with me. Maybe we just don't know the details, but grandma went to the house, the door was open, the radio was on, dad went home, but days passed and then we decided to report him missing. The Jason thing, I don't know. I don't necessarily think it fits into this. I will go back to, and I know David called it out earlier. Yes, the police did a really good job, but also this is a small town police force. I'm going to go back to my question. What are they overcompensating for? Y'all pulled out every single red carpet that you could pull out on this case. And I don't know how much they did for this other murder case I was in all four, but if it wasn't half as much as what they did in this case, then I have questions about why you did so much for this case. You're overcompensating for something. And so where I tie all these things in is the drugs. Maybe Jason was a drug dealer. That might be a stretch. But what I really think is these two guys that were fixing the alternator. I think they were doing it in return for maybe some drugs, and maybe Jason got drugs from somewhere. Maybe it was an undercover cop person. Maybe Gina was this drug goat. I think that's where the cabinets came in. So drugs and money could be one and the same. So that's why they both went into that cabinet to try to find it. And so then maybe somebody was like, oh, you don't have it. We got to be done with you. Where I'm going to tie my police corruption in, every single state has, at a minimum, 5 police officers in that state that are involved in drug trafficking and human trafficking to some extent. There's money in it. And they are on the inside, and it's very easy for them to make money off of it. This is a small town that has a drug problem. The police are doing too much. Maybe they were part of this whole drug ring, and because he couldn't bring it to them, they said, okay, let's get rid of him. This is how he's going to pay for his drug debt. Or the police officers, we're going to show you exactly where to dispose of this body, how to hide this body, how to never find this body. And we're going to throw everybody off when this clue comes in 2009, and we're going to dig this big hole knowing that nobody's ever going to turn up there. And that's my story. Drugs and his police corruption, and Gina is a mule. And I forgot to point this out, but I thought this was interesting. A retired sheriff, and this will probably play into going against my police corruption, but a retired sheriff questioned if Gina was really telling the truth about her story.
So it wasn't the retired police officer. So there is a retired police officer from New Jersey that has been investigating it on his own and is pretty active on social media discussing it. It was the police initially when Gina's story said that they felt like what she was saying, that maybe they had just gotten everything that they were going to get from them. So basically what they said is, quote, they know who was last seen with him, doesn't expect any help from them. And they go on to say the people that were with him, friends of his, are not cooperating well. So I suspect an illegal act possibly contributed to his disappearance. They're really hindering the case. And if they did something, they're not going to give any information. So that was quickly after Branson went missing that the police made that statement in a news article that seemingly that they were thinking the other 2 individuals weren't telling the whole story, or they thought that maybe something else was going on.
Which could play into my speculation either way.
So this one is tough, and I think that you can almost pull at any of these threads and go down any of these possible theories, where I could almost see any one of them being plausible, which I think is probably why there hasn't been anyone arrested for this. They don't have enough. Branson obviously has never been found, dead or alive. That makes any case more difficult to bring charges. I think Gina's whole story, I have so many more questions about the events that happened that day. Think about it. She was interviewed multiple days after this. If she wasn't involved, would she have remembered all of those details that she did? This was six plus days later that she was interviewed about this, and she has these details that saw Branson going through the cabinet, then I saw the mechanic going through the cabinet, then I looked out the window and the jumper cable. She has a significant level of detail, and all of that could be very true. But are there other things that she's leaving out of the event of the day, whether that's nefarious or not, whether she just doesn't remember because she was interviewed 6 or 7 days after the event of what happened? And if she had nothing to be involved with, she wouldn't have remembered all of those things. She wouldn't have been thinking about it for multiple days after it to remember all of those things. But I have a lot of questions about Gina, about those other 2 individuals. I have questions about why they have never been named publicly. I guess it could go one of 2 ways. If they cleared them and they really don't think they're involved, they don't want to bring their names up. But I could also see it in another way, that if they think they're involved, the police are keeping that close to their vest. I think it's very possible that they all know more than they're saying and could have more keys to actually what happened to Branson. Now, I could also see if we're going with Gina's series of events and Branson goes to put the jumper cables in the shed and says, oh, I'm going to go out for a bit, but I'll be back in a few minutes. He didn't take his wallet. He didn't take his personal belongings. He's not going shopping unless he had some cash in his pocket, which I guess is possible. He could be walking to a corner store, but how close was that corner store? Like, where was he going in those few minutes? What was he leaving the property for? What was he leaving when the mechanics were still at the house, when Gina was still at the house? It seems odd. Now I can see a couple of other things happening if we're going to pull at other threads. I could see that the shed is adjacent to the house. It seems like if that's the series of events, last time he's seen he's going to the shed, I can only see a couple of things that might have happened. He came upon somebody that was at the shed that ended up abducting him, but then was somebody lying in wait? Was it an opportunistic thing, but this is on the property? And I go back to the fact that the encounter with his neighbor happened only 4 days before he went missing. It's putting more weight on it than maybe I would if that was something that just happened in his life at some point. But the fact that it happened the timeline 4 days before, did he go out to the shed? Did he see Jason there? And not saying that Jason was involved in his disappearance at all. I want to be clear, the police have never named him as a suspect, but what if Branson saw Jason, they had a conversation, Jason tried to talk to Branson about what happened 4 days ago. Branson got upset and said, I gotta take a walk. And he starts walking further away from his house. He's not gonna be gone for just a few minutes. He didn't bring his wallet because he plans on coming back. I can't believe the hitchhiking story that he was gonna go visit his friends in Kansas City because he didn't bring any of his things. But say he's walking away from the house if he got upset or just going down the road and somebody, could be Jack Wayne Rogers, sees him on the side of the road, rolls down the window and says, hey, do you want to go have some beers? Do you want to go hang out a bit? Branson's in a state of being upset. Sure, why not? Let's go do that. I could also see that happening. So I feel like because there's not definitive facts anywhere, you can almost fit it into any one of the theories of things that happened. I'm really stuck on the fact that a necklace that resembled what Branson had was found in the car.
Yeah.
That's tough for me because the family identified it as something that Branson wore. Was it a common necklace that a lot of people wore, or was this like a unique necklace that Branson would have worn? That just sticks with me. And I wonder whether even if the police feel like he did it, and even though the police I know have said that they think it's drug related, this person's already in prison. If they feel like they don't have enough evidence, maybe they're trying to bring it to the prosecutor who has to sign off on bringing a case. Prosecutor says, you don't have enough. We can't bring this case. We can't try this guy for this. He's denied it. We don't have an airtight case. And I think the information about Branson potentially being involved in the drug trade, like, I'm just uncomfortable with that because I just feel like there's not enough to say. And the police obviously know more things and they have more information potentially, but I just have a hard time hanging my hat on that without more information about what Branson's potential involvement in that could be, especially if he's telling his aunt he wanted to go get clean and he wanted to go into rehab. If he's using in this community and he is wrapped up in anything like that, I could see that also being a trigger of him leaving. They're losing him if he's going to go into a rehab facility. But I have a hard time hanging my hat on that it's solely that he was involved in the drug trade in some form or fashion. I do think what's clear in this case is that this is a very small town. It's not like he traveled to a big city and disappeared. Presumably, he was last seen on his property.
With 3 other people there. That's what blows my mind.
So I just feel like somebody has some level of information that if they just came forward, this case could be solved. And I just hate that most of Branson's family has passed without knowing what happened to Branson. To close it out, I want to give a description of Branson. Branson was 20 years old at the time that he went missing in April of 2001. He is a Caucasian male weighing approximately 140 pounds and stands at 5 foot 10 inches tall. Branson has blonde hair and blue eyes. He has a small faint scar on his upper right cheek and a small scar on his left knee. He may be wearing jewelry, including necklaces and leather trinkets or chains with arrowheads on them. If you have any information regarding the disappearance of Branson Perry, you can contact the Nottoway County Sheriff's Office at 660-582-7451. Also, if you'd like to provide a confidential tip, you can also contact the Center for Missing Persons on their 24-hour tip line at 910-232-1687. And I just want to thank everyone for being here tonight. I know this was a very tough case, and I think at this point, all we can do is speculate wildly.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to our show today. We ask you to please subscribe to us on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, or anywhere else that you find your favorite podcasts, just so you don't miss out on any of our episodes. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at SWACPod, SWACPOD, or you can contact us via email for questions, comments, or case ideas. Our email address is swacpod@gmail.com. That's SWACPOD@gmail.com. Thanks so much for speculating wildly with us tonight.